So now we have Colleen joining us here to start talking about something really fundamental, learning outcomes and level descriptors. So Colleen, the floor is yours and your presentation will be uploaded. Choose the microphone you want. I think do you want this one? This is mine, it is disinfected dental, only you can use it.
I'll just use that so I can.
So you know how to do it. The first you have to touch, and in principle it goes. You can use also this thing for the.
Let's go just behind this. Can it go behind the screen so that I can see what I'm presenting? I think that's perfect. Thank you very much and good morning. I will be addressing two essential building blocks of qualifications frameworks. The one is learning outcomes, and then the second one, although it is not completely separate, it is the way learning outcomes are used at the level of the framework. I'm going to be talking about level descriptors. To find out more, we've got training modules 1 and 2, thematic brief 10, and we've also got an orientation note on RQFs. And I want to encourage everybody to make use of the ACQF website and go into those documents. It's important to understand what the key definitions are and what the key concepts are. At an extremely basic level, learning outcomes is what a learner is expected to know, be able to do, and to understand at the end of a learning process. Usually when people ask, so why are you focusing on learning outcomes? Before we used to focus a lot on input. What did you do to get this qualification? You know, what did you study? But now we actually want to know, you have this qualification now, what can you do with it? So that is the shift. Sorry. I just wanted to, I think I've gone a bit too far. I just wanted to show you that the differences in the definitions, it's not that, sorry, the technology is getting the better of me here. Okay. Just the definitions, and you have this presentation, so you've gone through it. I'm not going to go through it word for word. There's a common meaning. So even if you look at a definition of learning outcomes in CEDEFOP, you look at it in the Addis Convention, which we will learn about tomorrow, we will hear more about. The basic of the definition is the same. So this, can I go? So this learning outcome, so what is it? It is an approach to qualifications design and how to compare qualifications. So yesterday I heard people speaking about, you know, so how do we eliminate variation? How we reduce variation? So learning outcomes is actually a common language for describing and comparing qualifications. It provides an understanding of what will be learned and what is the best way to achieve it. Okay? Very learner-centered, so the learners know upfront what is expected of them, and it encourages them to take the initiative and to take responsibility for their own learning. It is very much linked to personal achievement, mobility, and recognition, because it signals that when you have a qualification, it signals that you have achieved a set of learning outcomes, which usually culminate in a qualification award. So it's got a very personal agenda to it. It obviously supports credit systems, because for each learning outcome in your qualification, there's going to be some kind of credit allocated to it. And in an example later on, I will show you how that's done. And I'm sure you've got examples of yourself as well. Very importantly, and something that Jens also mentioned yesterday, it allows stakeholders to have a better understanding of what to expect from a qualification holder. So when that person has this degree, what can you expect them to do? In the evaluation of qualifications for work or study purposes, also if you have the learning outcomes of that qualification, it is actually a little bit easier to compare that qualification with the qualification that you're wanting the person to be compared to. So this learning outcome, so how do we write it? It's actually the process is very, very simple. It is verb driven. And I'm using this example here. I think it's a Cape Verde qualification. If Cape Verde recognizes the qualification, it does come from a Cape Verde qualification. So it normally starts with an action verb like organize, and then so what must the learner organize? The learner must organize administrative processes. What is the context for presentation to public entities? That's at a very simple level if you want to write a learning outcome. So there is your learning outcome. Organize administrative processes for presentation to public entities. That is one of the learning outcomes of the level 5 accounting qualification. You can always work backwards from, so what do you want the learner to achieve? And then you work backwards. And for every verb-driven statement, figure out what your teaching and learning strategies will be, and also how are you going to assess that? So you can already see if the person must do that, how are you going to teach it? And then how are you going to assess that? Avoid having too complicated sentences, because you want people to understand what this learning outcome is. So you don't want to have too many verbs. So you will rather split the verb. If I'm going too fast, just slow me down, eh? Then very importantly, and in a later slide, I'm going to show you that learning outcomes have multiple uses at the level descriptor level, in job description, CVs, and so on. So you must think about the context within which that learning outcome is written. It must fit the purpose of the context. And then very importantly, you must be able to achieve that learning outcome within the time and available resources. How do I get rid of it? Eduardo, you must just tell me when I've got 10 minutes left, because I need 10 minutes for the ACQF level descriptors, please. Oh, that's not working. So the learning outcomes ecosystem, and you've heard some people talking about it. So the main thing, it is a common currency. It enhances transparency. It is the building blocks, or we call it the glue of qualifications policy. Very much about coherence. That learning outcomes help us to classify a qualification in the National Qualifications Framework. It helps us to kind of position our teaching and learning and how it will be assessed, and certification. And then very important, quality assurance, that continuous improvement between what is expected and what is achieved, and that feedback loop from the labor market, very important in the learning outcomes ecosystem. Here I just want to show you the relationship loop. So learning outcomes, it's kind of two phases. So you write a learning outcome to say, at the end of this, you will be able to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then you have to assess that. So you have your expected learning outcomes, and then you also have your achieved learning outcomes, which is achieved after assessment. So you have your desired, and the other one is obtained following learning. You can read a little bit more about that. CEDEFOP has introduced a number of publications on this. So that is your continuous improvement. Moving to level descriptors. So a level descriptor is a type of learning outcome that is written for a qualifications framework. So it tells us, what do we expect from learners at that qualification level? Okay, so you can have TVET qualifications, and you can have higher education qualifications on the same level, because a framework is not really about one sub-framework only. So it just tells us at the generic level, what do we expect from a learner with that level of qualification? There are lots of similarities between the level descriptors of national qualifications frameworks and level descriptors of regional qualifications frameworks. They are both kind of generic, but at a regional level, there will be no links to qualifications. And in a national qualifications framework, there will be links to qualifications. But at a regional qualifications framework level, there will be no link to actual qualifications. It will be the countries that will be referencing to that. Okay, just what I said before, the NQF level descriptors will always be more detailed and more complex than a regional qualifications framework level descriptor because it needs to capture the complexities of that national system. Linked to features of existing qualifications. So when I look at your level descriptors, I'm also going to look at your qualification types that are linked to that level descriptors. At the level of the African Continental Qualifications Framework, because it is a regional qualifications framework, there are going to be no qualification types immediately linked to that, because countries will reference their whole frameworks to the African Continental Qualifications Framework. Okay, so here also what we said, the last point on NQF, you can have more than 2 qualifications on the same NQF level. It just indicates that the qualifications are broadly comparable in terms of the generic complexity at that level, regardless of where or how that qualification was obtained. So you can obtain it through RPL, it can be TVET, it can be higher education, as long as that qualification meets the complexity of that level. So at the regional level, the descriptors will be slightly different because they serve a different purpose. Okay. And here NQFs will reference to the ACQF, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that on Friday. It also at the regional level, it kind of provides an orientation for countries. So it is not a top-down where we say to countries, this is the ACQF, and now everybody must implement it in that way. But we can say, you know, these are the things that we encourage in member states. So it's a kind of an orientation towards common benchmarks for countries. And it's got a regional agenda. So what is what is important for Africa? So it's got a continental kind of agenda. And obviously it will not capture the same complexities as the national level descriptors. So there are multiple applications, and I don't want to run too much out of time. You know the education and training where learning outcomes are used, and there's a long list here in curricular level descriptors. So there's a long list there. Also in work, and you will know if you write a job description, you want to actually tell people what knowledge do you need, what skills do you need, what you need to be able to do. And if you say you want a specific NQF level, you can use that level descriptors to actually help you to write those job descriptions. Also, you use it when you are developing your CV, when you're talking about your experience, you write it, you know, from a verb point of view. You are able to develop a strategic plan and so on. So it's got a number of uses in personal work and education and training. I'm not sure we got time for a poll here, but we thought we'll just ask people if they've got any other uses of learning outcomes. Maybe they can reply on the chat. That's just what we were speaking about earlier on your continuous feedback, very important. Once the learner has that learning outcome, there must be a link with the labor market. So I've got this learning outcome now, I'm going into the workplace. What does my employer think about the learning outcomes that I've achieved? And can the employer say, you need to review those learning outcomes, you need to renew it. So there's that continuous feedback loop from the writing to the interpretation, to the actual achievement, to how they are experienced. So we call that the continuous improvement, where we get the labor market to feed into those learning outcomes. Now, yesterday, people were asking a lot of questions about how do we reduce variation. This is an example, and you can go into the presentation is available. You can go into the website. This is an example from the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. They have developed a set of subject benchmark statements, and I've just showed the social work one here. But it gives you an example of what they expect from social work qualifications. What are the kinds of teaching and learning strategies, the kind of assessment, what's the knowledge that you want a social worker, someone with a social work qualification to have, which will be different from somebody with an engineering qualification. So they've developed these subject benchmark statements. It's not mandatory, but it gives that guidance to help people to develop the learning outcomes in the particular qualifications. The tuning, the Africa was part of the tuning project. It was also looking at degrees in different, like degrees in medicine. And so what do you expect from a degree holder? What are the minimum kind of standards? And you can actually go into that website to have a look at it. And they try to make it very simple. You can see they said be readable in 5 minutes, not be longer than 2 pages, provide a coherent impression of the specific degree, must be succinct. So it gives a kind of frame of how to frame the degree so that it is clear and that there's some kind of common benchmarks and common standards. We've listed some countries here that are also using a learning outcomes approach in their competence-based training and approach par compétence, the CBT ABC, and there are other countries, and you'll recognize your country here, but there are other countries that are also using this, but it is also a learning outcomes approach. There are a number of publications available if you want to strengthen your learning outcomes approaches in your country. Also now in 2022, there is a handbook that is with the latest developments, but you can look at all of that. Just to show, this is from CEDEFOP, where they showed how people are using learning outcomes more and more. In the tuning academy, it's not only this. It's not only Africa that took part in that. There were also other countries, and you will be able to find information on a number of other subjects. You can see teacher education, civil engineering, medicine, linguistics, literary studies, art, history, and it's available in different languages. So you can go into that website as well. I'm just using an example here of for how learning outcomes are used at the level, descriptor level, and I'm using Cape Verde again. Their domain responsibility and autonomy. So it is very clear and it's in the public domain. So before the learner even says, I'm going to be doing a level 5 qualification, they can already look at the level descriptors because that is what they will be achieving. Because obviously it's linked to an NQF level. And this is the actual qualification I was talking about. There you can see organize administrative processes for presentation to public entities. It is a level 5 qualification. It meets the level 5 descriptor in Cape Verde. So and it becomes more granular. At the level of the level descriptor, it will be very generic. Now we're looking at, there's a qualification attached, so it becomes more granular. So it's very on financial management, accounting and tax management, it becomes more granular. Even when you go into that qualification and look at the elements, you can see how much detail it goes into it, even with the assessment criteria. I'm also just showing you some of the principles supporting the presentation of learning outcomes, and this Cape Verde qualification actually meets all those criteria, the verb, the context, a summary of what the qualification is about. We know exactly what type of qualification it is. So it meets the kind of broad principles of writing learning outcomes. So we also see learning outcomes used in qualifications and in qualifications databases. Please go into this if you have some time to have a look at Botswana, Cape Verde, Mozambique, and South Africa. I just briefly go into it here. I don't know where this line has come from. But this is from Botswana, and you can see this is the actual qualification in tourism management. It is at level 6. We know exactly what learning outcomes, what is expected from the student, from the learner. So display skills in conducting events. It's related to tourism. Communicate effectively. Demonstrate skills in budget. Contact tour guides and tour guide operations, and integrate technology, very specific to the tourism. So it becomes more and more granular. And then your assessment criteria, it's linked to all of that. So it becomes, it just to also put, just to orientate you that it does become more and more granular, and that is why you can have other qualifications at that same level, but also at level 6, because the differences will be shown in the actual qualifications. Here's an example from Cape Verde. It's that same qualification that I spoke about earlier on. You have the general, what is the general competence, the generic profiles, and you can see the units of competency there. It's the same in the professional profile and the personal profile. This is an example from Mozambique, where you can actually see that they have attached credit values. And you can find it on their website. They've attached credit values to the learning outcomes. So that you have your generic modules, you have your vocational, the mandatory modules, and then you have your integrated project. And you can see how the credits are attached, and you know how what is expected for a total of 120 credits, how they have split up the learning outcomes to meet that 120 credits. Just an example from South Africa, and you can go into this database as well, and there's all the information on the qualification, and then also the exit level outcomes. What is expected from this learner at this level? So why are we talking about level descriptors and learning outcomes when we have an African continental qualifications framework? So what's the purpose of that? On Friday, you will, and some of you have been in the previous workshops, but on Friday, we will talk a little bit more about this referencing of national qualifications frameworks to the African continental qualifications framework. And we've got 4 criteria. You can see level 1, the criterion 1 and criterion 2, level descriptors, learning outcomes. So we're encouraging all countries to have a learning outcomes approach in the development of their qualifications. It will just make it simpler to reference to the African continental qualifications framework. So we are saying learning outcomes are the GPS, and Eduarda mentioned this yesterday. It's the GPS in the ecosystem of qualifications. I don't think we're going to have time to take questions now, but maybe on the chat you can just, do you agree, and why? Any comments? But it is so it positions us in the writing of qualifications. So issues and solutions, and I'm sure you also have a number of your own issues that you think, you know, there may be more. A big thing is that learning outcomes, because they are written in a specific way, there are 2 specific schools of thought that say that, you know, there's a contradiction. So we have behaviorists who say that learning outcomes must be observable, you must be able to measure it, and constructivist says if it's you know, it's process orientated, and it must be open-ended to enable learning. So because we have these 2 trains of thoughts, when you read some of the literature on learning outcomes, you will find that people are saying that this is not going to work. Okay, and you will hear people talking about that learning outcomes dumbed down, because you're writing everything out. You must be able to do 1, 2, 3, organize this, talk about this. But what people don't understand is that learning outcome doesn't restrict you from going beyond that. It is just a positioning, but you can actually go beyond. It is only so we write it as threshold statements, and it doesn't mean that you cannot go beyond those threshold statements. Okay, it must be written in a way that can that teachers and facilitators can adapt it, and they can interpret it in the way that they think is best. It should assist teachers in identifying and combining teaching methods. It should not restrict it. So there must be this balance, because people also say, so you're saying it shouldn't be prescriptive, but in order to peg that qualification at a specific level, it must meet certain requirements. So why are you saying that is not prescriptive? So you must find a balance between it being prescriptive and descriptive. And then very importantly, it must be fit for purpose. So how do we ease the application of the level descriptors? I know some of my SADC people are here, and I know we had a lot of problems when we tried to speak about learning outcomes in SADC, because people were saying a learning outcome is not a level descriptor, a learning outcome is not. So we needed to bring together all those thoughts and say that learning outcomes have multiple uses. So this application of the learning outcomes-based level descriptors, it can be challenging. So you need to understand what is the purpose of that level of the level descriptors. You need to understand what is the vertical logic. You know, if you go up from level 1 to level 10, what is the logic? If I look across the level and I've got 3 domains, skills, I've got knowledge, I've got autonomy and responsibility, how do I know that these are all consistent? Okay, so make sure that the level descriptor, that it needs to be detailed enough to capture the complexities, but it also needs to be general enough to accommodate different parts of the system. Because level descriptors are not written for one specific system only. And it needs to be suitable for all contexts, not too academic. When it becomes very theoretical, people struggle a bit. Let me just see, I think I'm running out of time. Let me move. It's just, so we now with the African Continental Qualifications Framework level descriptors, you'll see that we have, and there are a number of infographics on the table. We have a set of level descriptors that has been developed. There was a complete process. We didn't find a methodology when we were looking at other countries, how they did it. So we developed our own methodology, and you can find all of that in thematic brief 10, I think. But there was a process to develop it. So we do have a set of level descriptors at the moment. We have worked on a set of principles of this level descriptors also, that you can also understand what the, it's better to apply something that you understand fully. So it's a learning outcomes orientation, it's principles of transparency, it's future oriented, it's generic, it's developmental and cumulative. So if you've achieved it at level 1, we don't have to repeat it again at level 2. We just say, okay, you've already achieved that at level 1, and we move on to level 2. And it needs to be conceptually and technically clear. So we've got 10 levels. We've got 3 domains: knowledge, which includes various kinds of knowledge, such as facts, principles, and theories in various areas. Skills refers to the ability to use knowledge to respond to information and address problems. And then autonomy and responsibility. So we've got definitions of all 3 domains. And then very importantly, we have a detailed glossary that explains the terms in the ACQF level descriptors. So they are the definitions we've spoken about. Now, when we speak about horizontal logic, so I'm just using here an example from level 1. So if I look across level 1, I must be able to identify keywords that I don't see in level 2. So we restricted using the word simple for level 1, and we decided basic we will leave for level 2. So simple, you can see they're repetitive, highly structured, close, minimal. For all of those, we've got a definition in the glossary. And here I've shown you how we've structured it in the glossary. So what does simple mean? It means uncomplicated and easy to understand. It can be used without experience and is found at the lowest level of complexity. Here we show how the progression, how it moves in progression in complexity. So you move from simple to straightforward, or from simple to basic, and you will find simple at level 1. So that is how we've structured the glossary. So it just makes it a little bit easier to understand. I'm not going to go through that, but it's the same kind of principle where we show you where mastery is situated. What does it mean? And we've the word mastery you'll only find in level 9. So for each of the levels, we've identified these keywords, just so that it helps you to understand why, what that level is about. So the vertical logic, and because when we were developing the level descriptors, we decided that we're not going to place level 10 at the top. We don't want to give the impression that higher education is much more important than general education. So we decided we're going to write it from 1 down to 10. So progression always goes from lower to higher levels, but the arrow is going down because obviously level 1 is at the top of the framework. So I'm just using one example here in the skills domain under what are the types of problems, because one of the elements under skills is how do we address types of problems. So I'm just showing you here what is the vertical logic. You know, we have to be very careful because we've already identified words across, but now when you look at it, you must be able to see progression in complexity. So there you can see, I mean, I've showed you simple, I've showed you mastery, but you need to see, you go from simple to straightforward, familiar, varied, unfamiliar, complex and sometimes abstract, complex and abstract, highly complex, mastery, emergent and new. And we kept those words emergent and new for the highest level of the framework, because that is where you normally situate your PhDs, your doctorates and so on. So for each of the 3 domains, we identified certain sub-elements, and you can see when you go through it, you can actually see the progression in complexity from one level to the next, and also if you look at what type of knowledge, how is it split up into different sub-elements? So it's type of knowledge and scope. In terms of the skills domain, so there we've got the type of skill. How do you respond to information? And you can also see the progression in complexity, and then also addressing the types of problems. We initially had the actual type of problem in a separate column, but we just decided to combine it because I've just shown you the type of problem in the previous slide. Autonomy and responsibility domain, we also struggled to, look at what are the elements that we want to speak about here. So we said it's about the context. So what is the context within which the person is working at level 1, highly structured, repetitive, at level 10, obviously emergent, new. And then also autonomy. What is autonomy? There are definitions of that. This just shows you how we positioned it so that you can see the progression in complexity from close supervision and guidance to expertise, and then responsibility at level 1 from minimal responsibility for self to expertise in management of new ideas, and then how we've positioned it so that there is some kind of progression in complexity. I think that may be the last. Thank you very much. I think that's the last. Thank you.